Hey there everybody, Electro here, and today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of making small little changes in your piano roll in order to make an overall better sounding riff. Now this can include different things like the timing of your notes, the different velocities of your notes, and as well as a lot of small little subtle sound design features. Now the reason for having the different note timings and velocities is that if you are playing a pattern into an actual keyboard, these small little variations will show up in your MIDI recording because, of course, a human player isn't as perfect as a machine. And trust me, depending on the type of genre you're going for, of course, I mean, something like techno, you'd probably want to be more computerized and robotic, but in general, having these kinds of little variations will take a very stale sounding pattern and turn it into something that sounds very interesting to listen to over and over. And indeed, if you listen to a lot of pop songs and you realize they sound very catchy but they have very simplistic riffs, often it's because the sounds that they've used have been designed in such a way that there's a little variation that you can't really detect immediately, even though it is a simple pattern in terms of the notes. Okay, so just to demonstrate what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a simple pattern and sort of take you through the process of making some of these small little changes to make your pattern sound more interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of put a saw here and make a little pattern. Okay, so there's our basic pattern that we're starting with. It doesn't really sound that great yet, but we're going to do some things to make it sound a little more lively. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to sort of change around some of these velocities to make it sound a little more interesting. I'm just going to randomly move these. There's not really any particular system I'm trying to do. I'm just randomly changing some of these around. Okay, let's give that a listen. So you hear how that kind of has a little more jump or step to it. That's what you want to do with the velocity. It just sort of adds a bit of interest there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off this grid here and set it to 128, which basically means we can slide the notes anywhere we want. And I'm going to slightly alter the starting points of these notes. And what this is attempting to do is just sort of simulate if you were to play these notes in. And of course, humans don't have perfect timing and machines do. So since we're not actually playing it in, we're trying to give it a bit more of a human feel, and you might not be able to tell the difference immediately with this kind of thing, but trust me, it's all these little small changes like this that add up to make a stale sounding loop sound a lot more interesting in a very subtle way. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of change the lengths of these notes a little. Again, just sort of to vary it from note to note and give it a slightly more interesting feel. Okay, let's have a listen. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is employ a very easy to do tactic to make our melody here sound a little more interesting. And what that's going to do is use keyboard tracking. Now if you haven't used keyboard tracking, you don't know what it is, basically it's like moving this filter based on how high or low your keys are. So when you turn it to the right, that means that lower keys will have a more closed filter and higher keys will have a more open filter. So you can hear that's a little more variation again in the pattern. So lastly, I'm just going to add a few more things here. I'll add a little bit of pulse width modulation just to add a little bit to the sound. Maybe a second oscillator here that's slightly detuned. And I'm going to add another change here, which is just adding in a little panning back and forth loop for the second oscillator. This is less programming your notes and more just sort of making some subtle little things happen with your synth. Many synths might have an option just to do this with an LFO, but the Pulversator doesn't have panning as an LFO option, and plus we're already using it for pulse width modulation, so I mean, changes like this might not be evidently obvious again, but again, small things like this are what add up to make a more interesting sounding riff. So lastly, I'm just going to add a delay here on the send and use our auxiliary knob here just to use the delay. Alright, and that's the basic gist of it. Maybe not the best pattern or whatever to be demonstrating, but it kind of gives the basic idea of what you want to be doing with some of your riffs. Main thing is change the velocities around, kind of to give it a little more of a feel. Otherwise, you'll have a very robotic sounding riff that's just kind of played the same volume for all the notes, and it's stuff like that that makes your riffs sound very tiring. And if you spend a bit of extra time just to sort of shuffle the notes around a little or add little variations among all your sounds, it will really pay off and give you a much more organic and lively sounding song. So as always, I hope this was helpful. This is Electro signing out.